Israel's pathologically committed to aggression and supremacy, and so them bringing their barbarism to Iran is, as you said, not a surprise. Iran is the major force in the region that deters Israeli aggression, and so they were always on the Israeli-U.S. target list. And looking back now, all this talk from Trump about diplomacy with Iran and trying to reach a deal, that was just used as a ruse, as a smokescreen to prepare for something like this. And, you know, as from what we can glean from all the reporting so far, especially what's coming out of Israel, Trump was in on it. Trump was in on Netanyahu's plan to attack Iran and to try to go after regime change. And as we're going to air right now, one of the latest Israeli attacks on Iran has targeted gas fields, which is civilian infrastructure. Has nothing to do with nuclear weapons, which again is a fake pretext because Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. But energy, gas fields, that's an attempt to try to cripple Iran's economy. And why do they want to do that? Because they want regime change. That's ultimately their goal. That's what they're pursuing. And that's what all this is about.
Couldn't have said it better. This is the next phase of the Israeli unprovoked assault on Iran, is to attack its economic infrastructure, attack civilian infrastructure, gas fields, oil fields. And remember, before this began, there was a mysterious attack on the Bandar Abbas port. 3 facilities were simultaneously detonated or blown up. And that kind of previewed what Israel planned to do. This is a regime change war. And in regime change wars, Israel needs to bring the entire country to the ground. And so, it started with a decapitation attack, which was always going to be the first stage of the Israeli assault. And now it's moving towards attacks on the heartbeat of Iran's economy, which has managed to withstand decades of sanctions. Now, someone pointed out in the chat that my prediction on Judge Napolitano is not aging well. It wasn't really a prediction. And I said, I could stand to be embarrassed in the next few hours because I said, I can't imagine that Israel would just initiate an attack with talks coming on Sunday between Trump and the Trump administration and Iran in Oman. But I had actually heard from some sources around the administration, it was kind of going around Washington, that there was going to be an attack on Friday. I just couldn't believe it. After all of this time and all of this waiting and having been in Iran, seeing a fairly normally functioning society that was confident, that wasn't anticipating this kind of assault. And I guess with the negotiations taking place, I assumed that there was a period of a respite from war, which would be exploded by Trump finally declaring that the talks were over. And it was a foolish assumption. And the signs of war were everywhere. I mean, this was Tom Cotton, who's one of Israel's top stooges in Congress, declaring today. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, confirmed that Iran's terrorist regime is actively working towards a nuclear weapon for the sake of our national security, the security of our allies and millions of civilians in the region. This cannot be allowed to happen, which is a lie. You can see there's a community note. Hegseth didn't say that. But the signs were there, and U.S. facilities military installations were being evacuated across the region. So whether or not I kind of took for granted that this wouldn't take place under negotiations, I kind of would have thought that Iran's military intelligence apparatus would have been prepared for incoming decapitation strikes.
I'm trying to get everybody.
Sorry, that didn't come on right, but let's actually play that clip you mentioned of what Pete Hegseth actually said. This was earlier this week, speaking of Lindsey Graham.
So I'm trying to get everybody to think, let's don't do what we did in the 30s. They're going to use a nuclear weapon if they get it. Are they trying to build a nuclear weapon versus a peaceful nuclear power program, Mr. Secretary? Have the Iranians been trying to build a nuke?
There are plenty of indications that they have been moving their way towards something that would look a lot like a nuclear weapon.
What does that mean, look a lot like a nuclear weapon? Like, what does that even mean? What he means is he knows that they're actually not building a nuclear weapon because that's what U.S. intelligence only recently confirmed back in March. Tulsi Gabbard put out the intelligence report. The consensus view of the U.S. intelligence community is that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. What he meant was they were leaving the door open to becoming a nuclear threshold state, but that's a lot different than building a nuclear weapon. But just Hegseth's comments there, which are just don't even really make sense on its face, that was used by people like Tom Cotton to manufacture support for what Israel then just did a few days later, which is to bomb Iran. And before we address, Iran's apparent lack of preparation, the fact that so many military leaders were wiped out very quickly, let's remember what the U.S. stance was in these negotiations. Okay, initially Steve Witkoff was saying, "Yeah, that's fine. Some enrichment, some uranium enrichment from Iran is acceptable. We accept that," because that was, of course, the basis for the original Iran nuclear deal that Trump killed, which is that Iran had the right to peaceful enrichment, which it already has under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But then, as soon as the pro-Israel lobby freaked out about that, Witkoff and Trump changed their tune. And they started saying things like not only, zero enrichment for Iran, which is a non-starter because Iran has energy needs that it wants to meet to like service its domestic needs. And also it sees enrichment as a sovereign right. It's something it invested a lot in developing. And, Max, you can talk more about this having recently visited Iran. And then Witkoff also started saying we need to put caps on Iranian missiles. So what basically...
Yeah, that's new.
Yeah. So what Witkoff and Trump are basically saying is, our demands are that Iran basically neuters itself so that it can't basically meet its domestic energy needs. And also so it can't defend itself. Because if Iran's not going to have nuclear weapons, it needs a way to defend itself from this sociopathic Israeli government that is constantly threatening everybody in the region. And Witkoff is saying Iran has to agree to curbs on its missile program. So Trump and Witkoff imposed terms Iran could never accept. And this came after Trump issued some 60-day deadline for Iran to basically make progress. And if not, this is true. Trump did issue a deadline back in April, which was overlooked. That if Iran didn't meet that, then there was going to be consequences. And then Netanyahu, according to the Wall Street Journal, went to Trump and said, "Hey, it's 61 days now. Your deadline is passed. I have to do something." And Trump said, "Okay." So that's why we're here. That's why we're here. And Trump, what Trump could have said was, well, two things. One, I'm not going to insist on impossible demands that have nothing to do with nuclear weapons and that Iran can never accept. And two, no, Netanyahu, don't attack Iran, which is apparently what he claims he told Netanyahu weeks earlier. So there's no reason why he couldn't have done that again now.
Yeah, you mentioned the deadline, and the Wall Street Journal has a piece on how Netanyahu, and they always do this, how Netanyahu manipulated Trump using the artificial deadline that Trump established. And Trump always breaks his deadlines. He sets deadlines for negotiations with Ukraine and Russia, and he always breaks it. He doesn't care. It's usually a negotiating tactic. But it's a little different when the country that basically has you by the short and curlies is telling you what to do and manipulating you. This is Eli Clifton summarizing the Wall Street Journal report. It suggests that Trump simply acquiesced to Netanyahu's pressure and did not take strategic or political concerns into account, a disturbing portrayal, if true, of a president largely detached from policy making. That really sounds like the Trump that I know or I've seen. Someone whose brain at this point is like 82% bong water. Not that he's really not that I'm saying like Trump is participating in 420, but he's gone. He's not really, he doesn't care about the policy details, and he trusted Netanyahu. Netanyahu, what he always does, tries to do with US presidents, and he usually has had success with Republican presidents or with senators, what he did in Washington during the run-up to the Iraq War when he testified before Congress that Iraq had WMD and was aligning itself with Al-Qaeda, is he positions himself as kind of a guide and a teacher and someone who's not just a politician, but he's actually an expert who knows the ways of the Arabs and the Muslims in the region. And you should just trust him and let him guide you. And Trump ultimately did that, according to this Wall Street Journal article. On April 12th, Donald Trump sent Iran's leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, a letter offering nuclear talks. Khamenei warned that this could be a deception that would lead to more sanctions. And then on Friday the 13th of this month, Netanyahu, I mean, he'd already done so, had been pressuring Trump and said the deadline's up. It's 62 days.
On Thursday. So
on Thursday. So
here's the passage.
Up.
Here's the passage in the article.
Yeah.
When Trump and Netanyahu spoke again on Thursday, the Israeli leaders told Trump it was the last day of the 60-day timeline for Iran to make a deal. Israel could wait no longer, Netanyahu said, according to officials familiar with the call. Israel had to defend itself and enforce the deadline Trump himself had set. So just zooming out now from the article, defend itself from what? Was Iran attacking Israel? What was Israel defending itself against? It just makes absolutely no sense. And why does Israel have to enforce Trump's deadline? If Trump made that deadline, that's up to Trump. What does Israel have to do with that? Unless these two are in complete lockstep, which of course they are. And then going back to the article, Trump responded that the U.S. wouldn't stand in the way, but emphasized that the U.S. military wouldn't assist with any offensive operations. So Trump gave Netanyahu the full green light.
Yeah.
And yes, now he says the U.S. won't assist for now. But what Israel is now going to try to do is do everything it can to get the U.S. involved, and it will do that by continuing to attack Iran's civilian infrastructure, which will force an Iranian retaliation. Israel's hoping, I think, Iran will hit U.S. military assets that are throughout the Middle East, because that's also something Iran has to contend with, the fact that its adversary has military bases surrounding it. And that puts it in a very tough position. And what Israel will try to do is use that to its advantage and try to get Iran to retaliate against a U.S. military installation. And it has many, and there's many that it can hit. But this is the point here. Trump gave Netanyahu the full green light.
So basically, Israel just instrumentalized the U.S. and instrumentalized negotiations through Donald Trump, who has failed on every single diplomatic point so far, failed massively, disastrously in every area where he has leaned into supposed diplomacy, along with his golf buddy, Steve Witkoff. They used Trump and created an atmosphere of deception by convincing Iran that this was going to take place, this meeting would take place on Sunday, and that it didn't need to make immediate preparations, although war was in the air. IRGC commander Hossam Salameh, who was later killed on Friday, was actually warning that Iran had its finger on the trigger, that it had powerful warheads, and that this would be disastrous for Israel. But they obviously didn't prepare enough. And now here, since we've jumped ahead a little bit from the Israeli attack into the political dimensions, but I think it's important context, is Amit Segal, who is one of the biggest mouthpieces of Netanyahu at Channel 12. And he basically, I mean, we need to analyze this more carefully, but he's saying that the Trump administration was actually in on this perfidious act of using negotiations to deceive Iran and then launch this unprovoked decapitation attack to take out its military high command and top nuclear scientists. This is what Segal says from an Israeli source. And I would bet a large amount of Haktua and Trump meme coins that is Netanyahu speaking through Segal. So that's why I think this needs more analysis. We shouldn't accept it at face value. The attack on Iran was preceded by a deception operation that included media and diplomatic components, both internal and external, involving various actors. Israel succeeded in surprising Iran with psychological maneuvers. Now, I think it's pretty clear, and it's been corroborated by other sources, that the Israelis got Trump to pull back from statements threatening Iran with war. And asked him or actually demanded that he make overtures to diplomacy in the moments before the strike, and Trump acceded and did so, which kind of confirms what Sigal through Netanyahu is saying here. But what else could be going on here is that Netanyahu, this is after the strike, is that Netanyahu is seeking to implicate Trump and the United States in order to bait Iran into attacking U.S. assets in order to draw the U.S. in more deeply than it already is. And I am not saying that the U.S. was not heavily involved in this. I'm just saying Netanyahu's dream is to get the U.S. to engage directly with Iran.
I think that's a great point. I initially took these reports from Israel at face value. You had all these Israeli officials saying anonymously that the Americans are basically in on it, that Trump was part of the deception. That was the message. But I think you're totally right here, that Israelis are so cynical that, and given that this has only come from the Israeli side so far, there hasn't been a U.S. source confirming that the U.S. actively took part in a deception operation, even though it does look like they did from the outset. I mean, how can you look at their actions and conclude something different? But I think it's fair to not rule out the possibility that this is exactly what you said it was. That Israel is trying to basically implicate Trump even more than he already is implicated in order to provoke Iran, to get Iran to attack the U.S., which would then draw the U.S. And I think that's a really important possibility to raise. And look, Netanyahu also in his speech announcing the attack on Iran Thursday night, he went out of his way to thank Donald Trump.
I want to thank President Trump for his leadership in confronting Iran's nuclear weapons program. He has made clear time and again that Iran cannot have a nuclear enrichment program. Today, it is clear that Iran is just buying for time. It refuses to agree to this basic requirement of peaceful nations.
The requirement of peaceful nations who sign on to the non-proliferation treaty is that they have the right to peaceful enrichment for domestic civilian purposes. That's what Iran insists on the right to. Netanyahu is saying that Iran insisting on that right is trying to flout international law and go towards a nuclear weapon. So it's a total perversion of reality. But he went out of his way to thank Donald Trump, and he has every reason to thank Trump because Trump gave him the green light. And I agree that fully he also could be trying to provoke Iran to go after U.S. assets so Trump could help out Netanyahu even more than he already has by being a direct participant in this war on Iran.